Uh, Today we will continue from where we left off with the Ānāpānasati Sutta last week. I hope it was a long one, as you may already know, but it is worth the effort to go through it carefully, and it's such an important sutta. It's one of those efforts, human efforts, that makes our lives worthwhile to be human beings, as far as I'm concerned. To have a brain, to have a mind that can process, understand, cognize things. Those abilities, for me, they reach a maturity in order for us to be able to understand and take in things that are useful for us to navigate through life, to cross the flood from this side of the shore to the other side. And this sutta allows us, gives us a map, if you will, through the mindfulness of the in and out breathing, Ānāpānasati. So last week we covered the 16 steps of the 4 sets of 4, the tetrads, the 4 tetrads, and which was primarily the portion of the sutta that is dedicated more towards the breath per se. But as we saw, the first tetrad was the formulaic structure where it was addressing the breath itself. The others went into the jhanas, the others went into deeper and deeper layers of unlayering or cognizing. And if we recall, Lord Buddha was mentioning in the beginning of the sutta how the Ānāpānasati Sutta is very much weaved together with the Satipatthāna, as well as we're going to find out today, hopefully, the Satta Bojjhangas, which are the 7 factors of awakening. Now, as I was mentioning to some students this week, once you have those 2 powerful formulas, namely the Satipatthāna and the Satta Bojjhangas, if you're applying these, anything can turn into vipassana practice. It's so powerful. They are so powerful. Now, you don't have to necessarily do all of those 2 sets, meaning the Satipatthāna and the Satta Bojjhangas. But chances are that if you've come across the Dhamma, if you've been studying it or listening to it, reading it at some point, they nevertheless seep into your practice in different, beautiful, organic ways that are very personal also, I might add. So, we're going to be delving into first the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the Satipatthāna, continuing on from almost halfway through from the sutta and on. My goal is to finish this today, so we'll do our best. All right, here we go. And how, bhikkhus, does mindfulness of the in and out breathing address and fulfills the objectives of the 4 establishments of mindfulness when it is continuously developed and cultivated intently? Here, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu is applying the steps whereby he knows if he is breathing short or long, whether breathing in or out, or when he knows the body of the breath from the beginning to end, meaning covering it from starting point, the middle, all the way to the end without letting go of the breath. That's the whole body of the breath. Knows the body of the breath from beginning to end, whether he is breathing in or out, or when he is settling down the breath's movement within the physical body, whether he is breathing in or out, meaning the kaya sankhara, then excuse me, being thus keenly aware of his breathing, he carefully stays with the body, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. For I say, bhikkhus, that by staying closely with the body through the breath, does the mindfulness of in and out breathing become an aspect of establishing oneself with the body. Now, here, and by the term, the phrase, an aspect of the body refers to the breath being an extension or a manifestation, um, therefore, a physical event, the physicality, if you will, that is taking place, and which is very important to consider because we are becoming consciously aware of, if you remember the five khandhas, the five aggregates. When we say about a physical manifestation or an event, we're talking specifically of the rupa khandha, the form, as that we hear about, name and form, nama, rupa. This is the rupa aspect of it, and which has within it the four primary elements, the chatu mahadhatus that we've covered before, but I'll briefly go over them. Earth, water, fire, and air, which stand for solidity, fluidity, heat, and movement. So let's, and already you can tell, as Lord Buddha lays it out here in this paragraph, how we are talking about the first aspect of the Satipatthāna, meaning the body, Kaya Anupassana. He doesn't use the word, but we see it all throughout these words. It is for this reason that the bhikkhu carefully stays with the body, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. Now, with the phrase establishing oneself in the body, which again, it's the Kaya Anupassana portion of the Satipatthāna, especially in connection to shunning any thoughts of aversion or desiring, craving after the world. What we're talking about here is overcoming the nivarana, the five hindrances. If you recall, they are kama chanda, the desire for sense pleasures, the vyapada, which is ill will. Then we have the twin sets, the third, which is sloth and torpor. Then we have the restlessness and worry or remorse as the fourth set. And then we have the skeptical doubt. These are the nivarana, the five hindrances, which, as you might know, happen to be the major obstacles on experiencing the jhanas or even going deeper in the practice. So shunning any thoughts of desiring or aversion is referring to no longer being caught in the clutches of these five hindrances. And so if we are, then it means that, you know, it's they push us down, they bring us down. And if you've ever sat for meditation, you know when worries come, you know when you get agitated. Usually restlessness comes in, or just sloth and laziness or drowsiness. So that is what that shunning, desiring, or aversion towards the world, because we're going to be hearing that a lot. Furthermore, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu is applying the steps whereby he is sensitive to experiencing joy, whether he breathes in or out, or when he is sensitive to experiencing gladness. Now we're talking about the second tetrad, if you remember from last week. Whether he breathes in or out, or when he becomes sensitive to his thoughts and feelings, whether he breathes in or out, or when he quiets down his thoughts and feelings, bringing them to complete stillness, whether he breathes in or out. Then, being thus keenly aware of his breathing, he carefully stays with his feelings, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. Here we were talking about entering into the jhanas. The second tetrad of the Ānāpānasati, as we discussed last week, is addressing the entering into the jhanas, because we have joy and then followed by gladness. Major attributes of jhanas, specifically the first and second jhanas. I say this, bhikkhus, because there is a strong connection between feelings and the in and out breathing, which, when they are carefully attended to by staying closely with the feelings experienced through the breath, does the mindfulness of in and out breathing become an aspect of establishing oneself within feelings. This is referring to the Satipatthāna's second establishment of mindfulness, meaning Vedanānupassana, which is the observation or mindfulness of feelings. It is for this reason that the bhikkhu carefully stays with his feelings, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. We're moving away from the physicality of phenomenon, of our relationship with living experiences has moved from the physical to the, if you will, the emotional, because the first portions of the jhanas have to take us as soon as possible away from the body. That's why slowly that sensation is withering away, if you will. It's becoming more and more subtle, and that is why we see here the reference being for joy. And as the person develops their practice and going deeper, when they don't have the joy, it is an interesting phenomenon where the student might come and say, what's happening? What's happening? I'm not feeling joy. I'm not feeling anything. Well, because the relationship with the body, it's most, if you will, the grossest, but at the same time, in its subtle sense, the grossest, is related with joy, the body and joy coming together, and that is like the climax of what the body can tell us. Now, when we remove the joy factor, suddenly it's like a plane, an airplane that lost one of its wings, major wings, and now it feels like, what am I going to do? I'm lost. What am I doing? So there is no relationship with anything other than something more sublime than joy. And this is where the teacher's job is to soothe the mind of the meditator, allowing the person to start to trust more and more until they start having more of an appreciation to upekkha, which is already coming into the scene, already developing, until they get to settle. Because the connection with the body is becoming less and less until there's none, until there is contact being made to the body or with the body from the outside, usually. So, okay. Furthermore, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu is applying the steps whereby he is sensitive to experiencing the mind, whether he is breathing in or out, or when he gladdens the mind, whether he is breathing in or out, or while collecting the mind in samadhi by steadying it, whether he is breathing in or out, or while freeing the mind, whether he is breathing in or out, then, being thus keenly aware of his breathing, he carefully stays with the mind, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. Again, the hindrances will keep coming in and out as the person becomes better adapted and able to navigate through them. And it's a personal journey, because every one of us have or has our own ways of negotiating through the hindrances. But by the way, if you notice, Lord Buddha is beautifully going over the tetrads that we covered so far last week by using the formula or the language of the Satipatthāna, if you will, because he's pointing out, he's listing them all out again, just in case the students have missed or have forgotten about what were the steps of the Ānāpānasati. Again, collecting the mind in Samadhi is taking the avoidance of the nivarana, the hindrances, to another level, because you're going deeper into the jhanas at this point. Because now, if you notice, the object is the chitta-anupassana, the third aspect of Satipatthāna that Lord Buddha is talking about. However, bhikkhus, I say that proper development of the mind cannot take place for the bhikkhu who is without focus nor attentiveness towards his in and out breathing. But by paying close attention to the quality of the mind through the breath, does the mindfulness of in and out breathing become an aspect of establishing oneself within the mind. It is for this reason that the bhikkhu carefully stays with the mind, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. Staying with the breath equals with staying with your object of meditation. Okay, we know that. But staying with the breath also means staying with the mind. That's what we're seeing here, the connection. It's no longer just the breath, something to do with the breath, something superficial like that, compared to how deep it can take us. In fact, in the Maharahulovada Sutta, Lord Buddha turns to, which is from the Majjhima Nikāya, Lord Buddha turns to his son, Venerable Rahula, at the end of the sutta, and he says, I think I have it written somewhere here. Yes. And when the meditation on the in and out, he's addressing Rahula. This is from Majjhima Nikāya 62. So at the end of the sutta, Lord Buddha is addressing Rahula after he gave him a very clear set of instructions on how to practice. He says, and when the meditation on the in and out breathing is cultivated and developed in this manner, Rahula, even the last breath does not leave your body without your full awareness and knowledge of it. That's deep. That's pretty poignant. That is strong. Even the very last breath does not leave the body without our full awareness and knowledge of it. So you're not living life, life is not happening to you. You are leading your life. You are practicing. And that is an aspect of living the holy life, the way I see it. Furthermore, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu is applying the steps while experiencing and watching impermanence, whether he is breathing in or out, or while experiencing and seeing detachment, whether he is breathing in or out, or while experiencing cessation, whether he is breathing in or out, or while experiencing relinquishment as he keeps giving up, whether he is breathing in or out, then, being thus keenly aware of his breathing, he carefully stays with the various mind objects and their relationships, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. This is in reference to the fourth Satipatthāna, which is Dhamma-anupassana. Dhamma in this case are not Lord Buddha's teachings. They are phenomena, or sometimes referred to as mind objects. I like to add the qualifier relationships as well, in this case, mind objects and their relationships, which includes several things, obviously, starting with, or we can start with the order isn't important, but they include the five hindrances, the five khandhas, including the Four Noble Truths, among others. Therefore, bhikkhus, he wisely abandons thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world, as he restfully stays close and watches over with an equanimous state of mind. And by paying close attention to the various mind objects and their relationships through the breath, does the mindfulness of in and out breathing become an aspect of establishing oneself through wisely understanding the various mind objects and their relationships. It is for this reason that the bhikkhu carefully stays with the mind, striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. So, steps 1 through 4 were the Kaya Anupassana of the steps, by the Tetrad steps. Then we saw from steps 5 to 8 the Vedana Anupassana being covered. Then we just saw steps 9, 10, 11, and 12 covering the Chitta Anupassana. And now we just saw steps 13, 14, 15, and 16 covering the Dhamma Anupassana, which, again, they are for the Dhammas, or the relationships of those mental objects or things to be cognized. They usually are referred to in the Satipatthāna as the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 senses, the 7 factors of awakening, and the 4 noble truths. But they're not just this. Whatever comes up in the practice at that level of practice, that is, a mental object as such. This, bhikkhus, is how mindfulness of the in and out breathing addresses and fulfills the objectives of the 4 establishments of mindfulness when it is continuously developed and cultivated intently. So here is where Lord Buddha stops discussing just the relationship of the Ānāpānasati with the Satipatthāna. Now he's going to move to pointing out what I was trying to say earlier, that so long as we have the Satipatthānas and the 7 factors of awakening, you can never go wrong. You can choose any meditation object. So long as they're there, you're going to be practicing vipassana, and you are going to see and taste the deathless. That's what we'll see. Hopefully the deathless, but at this point, but as we go over, we'll see the connection that Lord Buddha is trying to make. And how, bhikkhus, do the 4 establishments of mindfulness address and fulfill the objectives of the 7 factors of awakening when they are continuously developed and cultivated intently? Here, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu carefully stays with the body, being keenly aware, while striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world, then continuous mindfulness is easily sustained and established in him. Because of this, whenever the bhikkhu is established in continuous mindfulness, the awakening factor of mindfulness becomes activated in him, as he strives to sustain and develop it further in order to reach its perfection. So the point here in the sutta is to simply establish our mindfulness in such a way where it simply doesn't move, doesn't go away. We don't lose focus of that mindfulness. We keep having a steady eye on it. We really know, really know and observe the breathing. It's very process that's taking place. So as you saw, we're not nitpicking as to where the breath is coming from, etc. You passed that point long time ago. And that is why it's important in the practice. This is not an intellectual affair. The Dhamma is not intellectual. Okay, yes, we use the intellect, we use logic, we use the rational mind. Of course, Lord Buddha pointed those out as aspects of knowing something, of knowledge, but they fall so short from the experiencing of the phenomenon, whatever it may be. And this is why I see so many times students get caught up in the cobweb of their mind, of their mental proliferations, in the name of Dhamma. And their egos come in, and their own conceits come in, wrong view basically comes in. Actually, it never left in some cases, but it makes it look like we are talking about the Dhamma, so it must be Dhamma, so I am practicing Dhamma, right? Wrong. So the breath can be, I think I mentioned last week, something like your marker, your spy, if you will, to life. It will tell you what is wrong about your practice and how and what is going on in the mind. This is not just about the jhanas. The Satipatthānas are not about the jhanas. It's just simply one aspect of the description of the 16 steps of the tetrads. We need to be more concerned about how am I carrying my awareness with the breath? Is it there in the first place? So we are developing a much deeper sense of awareness and capacity to see beyond the obvious, even the way that we like to interpret things, meaning our own narratives of how the world is, or in this case, how the Dhamma is supposed to be. This is what Lord Buddha is saying. Well, how do you know? Let's reconnect with the breath and go deeper into the finer nuances, penetrate the finer nuances of our own mind. And that is how we are going to be establishing this very beautiful bridge between both the awakening factors, 7 factors of awakening, and the Satipatthāna. But specifically, as we're going through the 7 factors of awakening, each of these we'll see, like we just saw with the mindfulness of the body, how it fulfills the awakening factor of mindfulness. Because if we are with the breath all the time, then we are mindful all the time, which, by the way, takes our practice of sati to a whole new level. So the perfection of, if you will, of these 7 factors individually pointed at or individually selected. So now we're looking at mindfulness, which is sati, the first of the 7. Each of these have now reached their fulfillment or their ultimate state in the meditator. And then we're gonna come to the joy, for example. That is the highest joy that one can experience. Okay, but they are off tune. They might be perfect, but the person has to still harmonize them, balance them out, balance the seesaw, if you will. And all 7 of them are on that platform of the seesaw, but they're off, wobbled. They're not lined up. And that is what the practice is going to allow us to be doing. While living mindfully in this manner, the bhikkhu begins to thoroughly investigate as he wisely examines whatever state he is experiencing with discernment. Because of this, the awakening factor of investigation of states, Dhamma Vicaya, becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. We don't take a time out from mindfulness. We don't take it off like we do with coats and, heavy duty clothing when it gets warmer. We don't hang it somewhere. We don't put it on a shelf. We're always keeping with the mindfulness. Sometimes we lose track of the breath. That's okay. Reconnect with the body. How is your body touching the surfaces around you? Can you feel your clothing through your skin? Are your hands touching each other? Okay. Can you feel the warmth that your hands coming together are creating? So even though you might have temporarily lost connection with the breath, there's so much data still coming in. The problem is there's no sati. So who cares if it's the breath or something else? Use them. That's what Lord Buddha is saying. Sometimes you lose track of the breath. but you're still feeling the strong emotion, whatever it may be. Maybe your heart is jubilant because of you seeing someone or something that was just touching or bad or disgusting or unwholesome. That's still a feeling. Use that. That's why Satipatthāna is such a powerful tool, because ultimately it is teaching us, the Satipatthāna is teaching us to do life, underline do, to practice life, to taste life. So it's not an about affair. That's why when I say that Dhamma is nothing to do with intellectualism or things like that, because it is practice-based. It is life. It is not about life. It is life. It is patipada, as Ajahn Mun would say. It is a practice-based path. That's why it's even called, the Eightfold Path. It's a path. It's a magga. What do we do with the path? We walk on it. We don't stand there on the path like a cactus tree. Even a cactus moves, grows. So while wisely investigating his mental states in this manner, the bhikkhu experiences a surge of tireless energy swelling up within him. Because of this, the awakening factor of persevering energy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. When experiencing such energy within him, suddenly there arises joy in the heart. Because of this, the awakening factor of joy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. It's a wonderful thing how Lord Buddha is laying this out in front of us. And if we follow that train of thought of, this path is all about practice, then the meditator gets to taste for himself or herself how? By putting in persevering energy, unremitting effort into the practice. Meaning, if you are dealing with the nivarana or one of the hindrances, let's say the sloth, you're sleepy, you're drowsy. Oh, okay. Instead of giving up, instead of just handing the keys over to laziness, push a little bit more. With kindness, though, with consideration, but with willfulness. That mustering up of extra energy soon turns into joy. It's a wonderful mechanism. It's a wonderful transformation. You can even call it an alchemical process, where something wonderful happens. Even though 5 seconds ago it felt like it was the end of the world and you were going to put your head on the pillow and sleep because your body was like, I'm tired, Bhante. I can't do this anymore. Well, let's try a few more minutes. Just 1 minute. How about 30 seconds? How about one single breath? And that is how it expands our level of tolerance of how much we can give or take, depending on the context. This is how we also practice sila, for example. This is how we can bring all the three trainings together, sila, samadhi, panya, together. In the Sedaka Sutta of the Samyutta Nikāya, a wonderful sutta where you have a story of a brief one, not a long one, where there's an acrobat. Meda Katalika, I think that was his name, Meda Katalika or something like that. So he happens to be the teacher, and they are on a pole. They're like almost like if you ever come across Cirque du Soleil, things like that, acrobats. So they are doing a very demanding maneuver up on the pole or ropes, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but The teacher is saying, oh, they're standing on each other's shoulder while on a post or something, high up from the ground. And the teacher says to his student, who's underneath him, supporting him, you protect me and I will protect you. That way we will both be protecting each other. And the student apparently is wiser, because he says, no, 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 teacher, he says, I protect myself, you protect yourself, and that way we will both be protecting each other. And the teacher also sees the point of the student, and he says, yes, you are correct. Now, why do I mention this? Because Lord Buddha mentions this sutta from the Samyutta Nikāya to be such a powerful clarifier of what we mean by practicing the Satipatthāna. Because by protecting oneself, we protect others, Lord Buddha says. And having protected others, we're also protecting ourselves. Well, what is the connection with mindfulness? Everything. Everything. If you've ever seen those Arctic expeditions or mountaineers, when they go up, whether it's the Andes in South America or in India or Nepal, when they're climbing the tallest mountains in the world, they have to pass over ravines and crevasses, and there's a line of mountaineers, climbers, and they tie themselves up from the waist with ropes to each other. There's usually like a space between them, like maybe 2 meters or 10 feet or something like that. Why though? In case one of them falls, the others can pull him out. So you will be pulling yourself out when you come to a moment of mindlessness, when you have forgetfulness of the breath. And you reconnect through the feelings, or reconnect with, oh, what's going on with my mind? Why is it so tumultuous? Why is there so much movement, restlessness? That can become, because you're practicing at that point, the Dhammanupassana, the mindfulness of the mental objects. You're seeing the relation. You're also dropping down to Chittanupassana now. You're becoming more anchored. Oh, I see now. I'm becoming more relaxed. Oh, that's a feeling. Okay, and then you catch up with the breath. You see how they're all connected. So one person falls and the other ones can pull him out of the hole. So we're protecting ourselves through the practice of the Satipatthāna. So when I say, please don't practice sila, your precepts, just in a superficial manner, this is what I'm referring to. This is what Lord Buddha is referring to, of course, where the mind is so present constantly that you know why you are not breaking a precept. You're not doing it to please anyone. You're doing it because you want to have that sense of peace in the mind. So, and how Lord Buddha in that sutta of the Sedaka Sutta, Lord Buddha, I have made notes here about that, and he says, and how is it, the bhikkhus, that by protecting others, one protects oneself? By patience, by harmlessness, by loving kindness, and empathy. It is in such a way that you can protect others. And by protecting others, you also protect yourself. Remember that saying that I've shared with you so many times, like my parents used to say, son, you cannot wash both hands with one hand. You have to use both hands to wash them both. So I find that quite relevant, because by protecting myself, I'm also practicing the the establishments of mindfulness. So I'm taking ownership of my life in this time, in this place. I am responsible for what I'm saying. I am responsible and aware of what I'm feeling. Even if what I'm feeling is not good, at least I am mindful of it, which is huge. My hands are on the steering wheel of the car. I'm driving. That's what I'm saying when I'm practicing Satipatthāna. And if you're truly practicing Satipatthāna in this Dhamma and discipline, you're also going to be practicing Sila. And if there's no right view, then there is no Satipatthāna. If there's no Satipatthāna, then there is no proper practice of Sila. It's just superficial. Like some people walk around and they list the kind of how many precepts they keep. Pointless, useless, stupid. So let's continue back to the Ānāpānasati. When experiencing such energy, we talked about the joy factor, okay? With the heart thus full of joy, soon his body and mind experience tranquility. Because of this, the awakening factor of tranquility becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. So when joy happens, which is the enlightenment, awakening factor, that high level of joy, because there's no other place to go, the mind settles. It's like reaching the bottom of the ocean and you're resting. Oh. It's also fine powdery sand down there. You rest. The mind slowly is now becoming able to accept stillness and tranquility, because this will take us to what we'll see in a minute, to Samadhi and eventually to Upekkha. So let me just mention the Samadhi part. With the body appeased and tranquil thus, he experiences gladness, and the mind becomes collected into Samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of collectedness of mind becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. In the Iccanangala Sutta, again from the Samyutta Nikāya, Lord Buddha says how by this is the bhikkhu who is still in training, who's not an arahant yet, who has not yet achieved his heart's desire, Lord Buddha says, but he's still pointing his trajectory still is towards the deathless, the amata dhatu, which is nibbana. The development and cultivation of mindful of collectedness of mind, or samadhi, through the in and out breathing, he says, leads to the asavas. That's why, including in the Anguttara Nikāya, you have this in the Book of Ones, where Lord Buddha talks about mindfulness of the body, and what that usually entails is, for him, in that context, he's referring to mindfulness of the body through the breath. And if the person has mindfulness of the breath, then the person, and if they're practicing assiduously, carefully, then their only destination is the deathless, he says. Sooner or later, you're going to get there. You're going to hit it. You're going to taste it. This is mindfulness directed to the body, is the way to the deathless. So collectedness of mind. Now we go to the last part of that. The bhikkhu then equanimously observes with wisdom the mind that is collected in samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of equanimity becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. Sometimes I've seen people who equate equanimity with just a sense of impassivity, some type of a inertia, if you will, no longer moving or just feeling okay, a sense of relaxation, and because their hearts or minds or egos are so eager to, it's interesting, egos are always eager, aren't they? Just, I don't know, side note, tangent definitely. But when the person is in equanimity, there must be present wisdom. You cannot have equanimity without wisdom, as we see in this Dhamma and discipline of Lord Buddha. They cannot be apart, because already you had to go through so much development. Remember, the second of the 7 factors of awakening is what? Dhamma Vichaya, which is all about wisdom, and they look at each other. They have to, it's as Bhante Nyananda would say, you have to have the element of wisdom and equanimity in order for the person to attain Nibbana. Because sometimes we might see individuals who have reached a level of practice that is, although very advanced, however, they are still stuck, because Mara is going to be always there by your side. Mara. Even after the person becomes an arahant, Mara is still there trying to, he's very incorrigible. Always trying to push and push and push and try to make it, especially if the person has not yet attained. And this becomes one of the biggest hurdles, where that state of inertia sometimes in the mind of the meditator gets to be called, oh, I must have attained an anagami, or I must have reached a deep level of nobility. No, you haven't, in many cases. So long as there is no equanimity, because the mind is becoming sharper and sharper. So what I'm trying to get at is basically, even though Dhamma Vichaya is the second of the 7 factors of awakening, that does not mean that we stop working on Dhamma Vichaya. It's still being sharpened, even at the level of upekkha. So it's never a state of just being sterile, just inertia, being stuck almost. Because sometimes I've heard of meditators who claim to be in the upper, higher arupa jhanas, man, they get bored. Well, that's not going to happen if it is true equanimity, because boredom means there's craving in the heart. Interesting. But how can the person know this? If they're truly in equanimity, then their wisdom will say, excuse me, hello, what are you doing? This is not equanimity. Okay, so we still have to work some more. So don't bask in your laurels. So we got work to do. Let's continue. Okay, reconnect with the breath. Okay, we got this. We can do this. Okay. So that is one of the reasons why I say allow, just, it's okay. Start with the beginner's mind. Be forgiving of yourself. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Now, because Lord Buddha is connecting the Satipatthāna with the 7 factors of awakening and Satipatthāna, we just went over the body portion. So you have the same formula being played with feeling, addressed, not played, being addressed through the gaze or spectacles of feelings, then the mind, and then mind objects. So we're going to see 7 times 3, so we're going to see 21 mentions. However, Lord Buddha is going to be, so it's a repetition in a sense. However, it is, the heading of it is, as you see, similarly, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu carefully stays with his feelings, being keenly aware while striving ardently, as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world, then continuous mindfulness is easily sustained and established in him. Because of this, whenever the bhikkhu is established in continuous mindfulness, the awakening factor of mindfulness becomes activated in him as he strives to sustain and develop it further in order to reach its perfection. But if you noticed in the beginning, the Lord Buddha says, whenever the bhikkhu carefully stays with feelings, the first set of 7, Lord Buddha was addressing carefully stays with the body. Now he's saying carefully stays with the feelings. So now we're talking about the 7 in connection to the second Satipatthāna. A whiteboard can really work, or a PowerPoint, but I'm not a fan of PowerPoints, especially when it comes to the Dhamma. So my apologies there, but I'm trying to draw pictures through words for you. I'm trying anyhow. So I hope it works for you. So okay, so but before we go further, there is a sutta, it's called the Simile of the Lamp. Simile of the Lamp, where Lord Buddha says how while he was still an unawakened bodhisattva striving to become awakened, he would practice the mindfulness of in and out breathing, and that way he would avoid getting his body fatigued and his eyes especially. And that was the thing which took him and to the point where he was able to destroy the defilements, the 3 kileshas: lobha, dosa, moha, lust or greed, hatred, and delusion. So I wanted to mention that because I hear sometimes from students how they are fatigued. So the simile of the lamp in the Samyutta Nikāya addresses that beautifully in connection to the breath, which I was just mindful of. And in it, Lord Buddha says how in connection to the likes and dislikes, and especially pleasant feeling, because we're talking about feelings here, awareness of feelings, painful feelings, the second type of feeling, and the neutral type of feeling. This meditation allows the person to also penetrate by seeing how these things transition between one and the other, between one into the other. They seep into each other because you have these streams of consciousnesses coming in and out constantly thanks to the 6 sense doors. So you're never going to have just one type of feeling. So as a psychotherapist, working with patients, when people would come and say, oh, I'm always in pain, I'm always in pain, after I've connected with them and built a somewhat of a empathic relationship where they see that approach that I'm having and they see that I mean well, I will go ahead and gently challenge that statement of theirs by always suffering. What do you mean always? At that moment, let's say I would be giving them, let's say, or they would be drinking water and they were warm, and now they're drinking water to put the bottle down or the glass down, and they're like still continuing on their sentence of how much torture life is for them. And I say, what happened right there? Hold on a second. Hold that thought. You just had a drink. Was the pain there with you? Let's be honest. Initially, they would say, yes, yes. I was like, okay. After we decipher and pull all these things out, and they say, yeah, I guess there are breaks. Impermanence. Anicca. Anicca is not something out there. It's not just about the world changing or our bodies changing. Yes, that is true, but so what? Ultimately, the Dhamma is all about what's going on here. It's an inside-out affair in that sense. Seeing, working through our own world, seeing our own narratives, our own wrong views. Lord Buddha, when he talked about wrong view, he wasn't talking about the wrong view of other people. He was talking about our wrong views, plural. And it's funny because when someone comes to that aha moment, even if it's a real aha moment, they want to come outside and tell everybody about their wrong views, the others' wrong views, and impose their right view upon them. Well, guess what? That is wrong view again, because you're not coming from the correct place of understanding. So whether the person is feeling pleasant feeling, unpleasant, or painful feeling, or neutral feeling, the mind, and he mentions this also in the simile of the lamp, Lord Buddha, how he was able to also see that they are all impermanent despite what badges they were wearing, what insignia they had on, what labels we give them. Essentially, all three types of feelings leave us empty-handed. And that's why we use memory and our sankharas to constantly relive them. Sometimes you have people who will feel guilty if they walk away from a painful experience. Yes, I used to be depressed. Yes, yes, yes. But are you depressed now? No. But you're making yourself depressed, I guess. Why? Well, because you are thinking about them. You're bringing memory. And the memory is what is being used to animate, to energize this thing called papanchas, the proliferation of thoughts. So if you are reaching the higher levels of equanimity of the 7 factors of awakening, be careful of the papanchas, because they can mimic everything. They're very good chameleons. And they're the ones who create the restlessness in the mind. So, while living mindfully in this manner, the bhikkhu begins to thoroughly investigate as he wisely examines whatever state he is experiencing with discernment. Because of this, the awakening factor of investigation of states becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. By the way, when you come across repetitions, we live in a culture that even translators today, and for the last, 100 years or so, they shun the idea of repetitions. I remember when I was a child, sometimes if I didn't know, let's say, my vocabulary or whatever term that the teachers were teaching, they would give us standards. Some of you might recall this, where we had to write it 100 times over. I hated it. And sometimes it became a homework that I had to take home to do those 100 times over, and I would have to write it. The interesting thing is that as a teacher later on, as a high school teacher, I was doing that same thing sometimes with some students. Not to repeat a bad cycle, but simply because I had seen the value of it. Of course, I wouldn't push them to ridiculous lengths like do it 200 times. Usually it would be 50 or 100, depending on the sentence they had to write. But what am I saying? Why am I bringing that up here? Lord Buddha loved the usage of repetitions. And there was never a time where there were no reasons for something that Lord Buddha said or did. Every single thing he did had a purpose. So for that reason, I encourage you to stay, because with whatever I'm saying, don't blank out, don't go somewhere else. And because the audience that Lord Buddha had around him, yes, he had all these different levels of the nobility, of noble Sangha, from Arahants down to Sotapannas, from Magga level to path level of each. So you had 8 categories of individuals sitting there. So he was saying this not necessarily for the Arahants, but he was saying it for those who have yet to attain what is yet to be, who have not attained what is yet to be attained. So, and if you look at the numerical discourses, Anguttara Nikāya, in the Book of Fives, when Lord Buddha describes as to the ways that a person can taste Nibbana, one of the ways is repetition, hearing it, listening it, reading it. So many people attain Sotapanna stage, Sakadagami stage, through just hearing. Even Anagami stage, even Arahantship, as the case was with Venerable Bahia and a bunch of other people. So there's so much wealth there. So try to be meditatively taking it in, the words of Lord Buddha, even though now we're going over the feeling aspect of the instructions. When experiencing such energy within him, suddenly there arises joy in the heart. Because of this, the awakening factor of joy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the heart thus full of joy, soon his body and mind experience tranquility. Because of this, the awakening factor of tranquility becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the body appeased and tranquil, thus, he experiences gladness, and the mind becomes collected into Samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of collectedness of mind becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. The bhikkhu then equanimously observes with wisdom the mind that is collected in Samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of equanimity becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. Similarly, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu carefully stays with the mind, now we go into Chittanupassana, being keenly aware while striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world, then continuous mindfulness is easily sustained and established in him. By the way, again, when we talk about shunning any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world, anytime you sit to meditate or trying to bring the mind to a state of collectedness, or you've experienced some jhanas, let's say, the hindrances will come, and they usually come in the shape of, oh, I want to have whatever happened yesterday to happen again. Or that jhana I've experienced, oh, it would be so great if I could have again a taste of that. Or even that state of stability or equanimity. It would be so good if I have that again. That is desiring the world, in a sense. Desiring or shunning whatever's happening. Let's say the mind is restless. So now there is this shadow boxing, or we're fighting against this state of restlessness. Well, it's not going to happen then, whatever it is that we want to take place in that meditation period. So that's why we need to pull our hands away from anything other than the object of meditation, whether it's metta, whether it's the breath in this case, whatever it may be, even if it's Maranasati, the contemplation or meditation on death, or the asubha, or the repulsive, etc., etc. Because of this, whenever the bhikkhu is established in continuous mindfulness, the awakening factor of mindfulness becomes activated in him as he strives to sustain and develop it further in order to reach its perfection. While living mindfully in this manner, the bhikkhu begins to thoroughly investigate as he wisely examines whatever state he is experiencing with discernment. Because of this, the awakening factor of investigation of states becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. While wisely investigating his mental states in this manner, the bhikkhu experiences a surge of tireless energy swelling up within him. Because of this, the awakening factor of persevering energy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. And they all feed on each other. It's a cycle. If you move one part, it's like the gears inside of a watch or an intricate machinery. If you move one gear, it moves everything else. If you've ever seen the insides of a watch, uh, you will see that. So the same things with the 7 factors of awakening. If you are being more and more and more mindful, slowly you have sampajanya coming in, clear comprehension. What is that? That's Dhamma Vichaya, which is wisdom. It's panya there, because you're seeing a process. That seeing indicates eyes, vision, understanding. And because you're understanding more and more and more and more, now you have the purpose is a lot clearer as to why we're doing this. This is when meditation becomes self-propelled. You don't have to hear me complaining to you or telling you to sit more or to dedicate more time, because now it is a very personal affair. You're invested in it. The depth of your understanding, of the peace of mind, as you're beginning to taste more and more sacred spaces within you, if you would call it like that. You're tasting more of a sanctity within you. Okay. So then you find more energy to put in. And when you put in more energy, all of a sudden, whoop, there's joy coming up. It's like you were fanning the flames, the fire. There's the fire of joy coming out. And everything gets brighter. The mind gets brighter. Even if you were lost in drowsiness and sloth and laziness, you were sleepy, boom. It's like you turned on the lights. In the wintertime when we were children, if we had power and we had to get up early in the morning, my mother would come and turn on the lights. It's like, Mom, turn off the lights. Why? Because we have to get up and go to school. It's dark outside. So the joy is like the light, but you see how they are feeding each other. It's like the gears moving. One gear moves, the others move. That's why we keep saying mindfulness, mindfulness, sati, sati, left and right. When experiencing such energy within him, suddenly there arises joy in the heart. Because of this, the awakening factor of joy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the heart thus full of joy, soon his body and mind experience tranquility. Because of this, the awakening factor of tranquility becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the body appeased and tranquil, thus, he experiences gladness, and the mind becomes collected into samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of collectedness of mind becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. The bhikkhu then equanimously observes with wisdom the mind that is collected in samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of equanimity becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. When we are with the breath and we're able to see even the very last breath before it leaves the body, as Lord Buddha was saying in the Maharahulavada Sutta to his son Rahula, we start feeling the end of the body approach. Now, you don't have to wait for death, actual death, to experience this. Every time you're experiencing the breath's end, you can experience this. But the question is, can I be mindful enough to be steady enough, to be curious and invested enough with the breath that I could go ahead and put my ear to it, as it were? Can I stay with the breath? So, in the simile of the lamp, Lord Buddha talks about how the oil lamp depends on oil and the wick, the piece of string that's being lit, in order for there to be fire. But when the wick and the oil are used up, that lack of fuel is going to make sure that the light goes out. Last week, students were asking about cessation, nibbana versus nirodha, and many times Lord Buddha talks about nirvana or nibbana as the extinguishing of the extinguishment, the going out of this fire. Poof, goes out. And there's a lovely sutta where you had Lord Buddha, his Arya Savakas, his Sangha sitting around him, but there's also the Devas and the Brahmas, and the Devas from different realms were present. And he was giving a beautiful sutta. Every sutta is beautiful. I don't know why I said beautiful. But at the end, as Lord Buddha is saying, is pointing out the extinguishment of the fire, one of the Devas who was developed to inspire those people around who are listening goes and does this to one of the oil lamps. Just does poof, the fire goes out. And we have that from commentaries, of course. I remember this. I haven't seen the commentary, but I believe it was a teacher who mentioned this years ago, and it stuck with me. It's a beautiful image in the dark, and oil lamps are lit. And in India, and as well as in Sri Lanka and other places, you have these brass or copper made, these towers, small towers of oil lamps. They usually come in threes, and they just rise up in progression. And just seeing that whole scene, that atmosphere, must have been just so impactful. Because Lord Buddha says, when the body breaks down and life has come to an end, and everything that is felt, since there is no one to be taking pleasure in it, no longer any pleasure to be taken in that experience, then everything becomes cool right here, right now. And that is from the a simile of the lamp. Excuse me. Similarly, bhikkhus, whenever the bhikkhu carefully observes the various mind objects, now we are on the last portion of the Satipatthāna, being used as a window or windows for the 7 factors of awakening. Carefully observes the various mind objects, dhammas or dhammanupassana, and their relationships in the mind, being keenly aware while striving ardently as he shuns any thoughts of desiring or aversion towards the world. Then continuous mindfulness is easily sustained and established in him. Because of this, whenever the bhikkhu is established in continuous mindfulness, the awakening factor of mindfulness becomes activated in him, as he strives to sustain and develop it further in order to reach its perfection. So just because our path is all about practicality, Lord Buddha was the biggest pragmatic, if you think of it. The things that he taught must have been applicable. Otherwise, they would never leave his lips, the instructions he would give. So similarly here, when he's talking about Dhammanupassana and then connecting it to the mindfulness of the body, which is Satipatthāna's first establishment, Kāyanupassana, how can I use the Dhammas that otherwise might seem to be so ephemeral, so in many cases non-tangible, conceptual even? How can I use that as a way to bring mindfulness to the body, one might ask? Well, if we pick, for example, restlessness, which is one of the 5 hindrances, which is part of the Dhammas, the Dhammanupassana. So if I just pick restlessness or sloth, oh, I'm feeling so drowsy, I'm feeling so lazy. Okay, what is the impact of that experience, of that Dhamma, if you will, on the body? How is restlessness being echoed, received throughout my body? If there is truly restlessness, then you will notice how, while you're sitting to meditate, or even when you are on the phone waiting for a call, your heart rate is going to start to increase. Your eyes are going to move a lot faster, left and right, erratically. Your thoughts the same way. You're going to be all over the place. And that's why when we are heated emotionally, restlessness is there. So the breathing is affected and everything. So by using the Dhammas, I just used one example. So you can use so many different ones there to reestablish yourself in the mindfulness of the body. So while living mindfully in this manner, the bhikkhu begins to thoroughly investigate as he wisely examines whatever state he is experiencing with discernment. Because of this, the awakening factor of investigation of states becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. While wisely investigating his mental states in this manner, the bhikkhu experiences a surge of tireless energy swelling up within him. Because of this, the awakening factor of persevering energy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. When experiencing such energy within him, suddenly there arises joy in the heart. Because of this, the awakening factor of joy becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the heart thus full of joy, soon his body and mind experience tranquility. Because of this, the awakening factor of tranquility becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. With the body appeased and tranquil thus, he experiences gladness, and the mind becomes collected into Samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of collectedness of mind becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. The bhikkhu then equanimously observes with wisdom the mind that is collected in Samadhi. Because of this, the awakening factor of equanimity becomes activated in him as he strives to develop it further in order to reach its perfection. Equanimity has this freeing quality to it for the heart. It liberates the heart every time we're equanimous. We must remember to disengage from whatever our thoughts are telling us, because we stop breathing freely when we think about others, their defilements, how deceitful they are or might be, etc. It steals our breath away from us every time we are lost in the world. Whatever is happening in the world today, or if these occurrences were not happening, don't worry, there would be other things that would be going on. Disturbing things, things that agitate the mind, take away our sense of security, if you will, security that is placed outside of ourselves. So every time we're engaged in thoughts about the world, we stop breathing freely. The mind is no longer equanimous. So if that's the case, then we cannot be or stay with the breath, because we're always fighting with someone else in the mind. We're fighting in the mind, which is another reason why restlessness occurs. And if there's nobody outside of us to fight against, we always have ourselves, our expectations of ourselves, and how we are falling short, etc., from experiencing that state of, I made it now, or something. So there needs to be this level of tolerance of ourselves, this sense of compassion and kindness, openness, allowance, permission to be whatever is taking place, allowing it to be, but not to just let it be like that truck where we pulled away our hands from the steering wheel. No, 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 no. We're very much present with them. This, bhikkhus, is how the four establishments of mindfulness address and fulfill the objectives of the 7 factors of awakening, when they are continuously developed and cultivated intently. And how, bhikkhus, do the 7 factors of awakening address and fulfill the objective of true knowledge and of release? Here, bhikkhus, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of mindfulness that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and that comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. True knowledge, or vidya, and release, or liberation, vimutti, cannot happen without seclusion, without detaching ourselves or cooling off from the things that surround us, whether they are habits, the company we keep, the close, tight-knit circles of friends, associations that we have, things that basically give us pleasure. Some time ago, there were a group of students, some of you were part of it here, that enjoyed being on a digital platform to discuss the Dhamma. And every once in a while I would check it just to see what's the context of the discussions, because I always encourage kalyana mittas, people to have kalyana mittas, because as Lord Buddha says, it's the whole path. Again, we need to look at what Lord Buddha says contextually. But we are people. We are social beings. We like pleasurable things. Yes, you might not be going after carnal pleasures as your practice goes deeper. You are not trying to go to a casino or to go ahead and just go to night clubbing and things like that. Yes, but there are other kinds of pleasure that can be easily distracting. The Dhamma is one of those. It's actually one of the worst in that category, because a category of things that can pull us away from the practice. Because on the surface, hey, it's the Dhamma. How can it be bad? And this or that person is my kalyana mitta. How can it be bad? And we are talking about the Dhamma. So it's just pure gold through and through. Yes, really? How is the quality of the mind? What is going on with your attitude before, during, and after each of the words that leave your mouth, or while the kalyana mitta, your friend, is talking? In the numerical discourses, Anguttara Nikāya, Lord Buddha and his Arya Savakas, especially Venerable Sariputta, talk very eloquently about the dangers in this tendency to talk, to seek company. Well, it's at least we are meditators. We like to sit together. We like to talk Dhamma every day or even every 2 days. Well, you are prolonging the extinction of your defilements. You are prolonging your stay in samsara, basically, because you're fooling yourself, because you think you're talking about Dhamma, but you're not. Go ahead and sit and practice. One of the suttas that I would like to cover with you eventually in the coming months, the new year, hopefully, would be the Ānāpānasati Sutta, and that is the meditation of death. It's a beautiful sutta. It's actually a two-set, Patana and Duttiya Ānāpānasati Suttas from the Anguttara Nikāya. And in it, Lord Buddha asks bhikkhus, he talks first about the meditation on death contemplation. And then you have a bunch of bhikkhus who say, Bhante, I practice meditation of death. The other one says, and everybody says, what? And Lord Buddha asks, how do you practice meditation of death? And the last two bhikkhus answer, well, without giving too much here and take from our time here, the reason why I'm saying this is because one of the bhikkhus says, the time that it takes for me to breathe out what I've already breathed in, or to breathe in whatever I've already breathed out, that time period, either one of those two, that was too long, by the way. That short time period that I have, he says, Lord, that is the time I say to myself, even if I have that much life left in me, I will contemplate Lord Buddha's Dhamma. I will think about, I will ponder, I will at least be with the breath. I will be practicing Sati. Buddha points him out. The other bhikkhu says, also close, he says, the time it takes me to just chew and swallow one single mouthful of food. Next time, try it when you're sitting down to eat food. Can you bring your awareness of what's happening in that chewing process? Or can you think about your own imminent death one day? And see what that does to your feelings. Does it jolt the mind? So it's so important for us to appreciate the seclusion aspect of the practice, because you will not progress so long as you are looking forward to the next conversation, the next conversation. And some people do it every day, sadly. And that is the surest way to drive away from the deathless. Because what Venerable Satipatthāna and Lord Buddha say in the context of seeking company is people start to talk. You're with company, you have to talk, right? And the more you talk, even though you're talking on the Dhamma per se, in the beginning at least, it soon enough turns into idle chatter. So now we are even breaking precepts. Because now you are talking nonsense, and slowly, slowly you're even going to be talking wrong views. What is adhamma? And that is going to make the heart become more jaded, and the mind more covered with avidya, not vidya, which is what we're after. Lord Buddha says, vidya and vimutti, those two things cannot happen without secluding yourself. Talk to them. Talk to your friends once a week. Beautiful. It allows the soil to really take in to give the nutrients to the seed and allow it to sprout its roots, to allow the seed to turn to this amazing, wondrous tree that bears fruit. But you can't keep digging on it every single day. Talking, even though it's Dhamma, so-called. Which, by the way, it's not, because you're talking too much. So, the biggest attachments are the ones that have convinced us that they are good and they deserve to be around us. Touch them gently to see if the mind gets agitated. The moment the mind gets agitated, guess what? There's an attachment there, a strong one. It becomes a matter of survival in some cases. Oh, I can't touch. No, Bhante, don't ask me to give that up. Well, there you go. We have found the second noble truth right there, which is the cause of dukkha. You let go of that, all of a sudden you taste nirodha, which is the cessation of that suffering. But you need to cultivate and maintain that. That is the fourth noble truth. Arya Attangika Magga, the Noble Eightfold Path. That's why it's there. So if we are attached to these pleasures, whatever they may be, we're just prolonging them. And we are prolonging also, by that action, we're prolonging our own suffering. That is the message of this good Dhamma, this true Dhamma, to put it plainly. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of investigation of states that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of persevering energy that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of joy that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of tranquility that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of collectedness of mind that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. Similarly, the bhikkhu develops the awakening factor of equanimity that is maintained by seclusion, detachment, cessation, and comes to its completion in relinquishing and giving up. This, bhikkhus, is how the 7 factors of awakening address and fulfill the objective of true knowledge and of release. This is what the Blessed One explained, and the bhikkhus were all deeply satisfied and delighted in the words spoken thus by the Blessed One. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Lord Buddha's disciples took the teacher's instructions and worked on them with unwavering perseverance, unremitting, relentless effort. And that's why they were able to achieve awakening. Lord Buddha describes it as a person who has caught fire, whose head has caught fire, whose hair is burning on his head. Can you prolong it? Can you say, let me take care of this. Let me still continue chit-chatting with you over the phone. Yeah, it's okay. I'll get rid of the fire afterwards. Can you do that? No. Or when your clothes are on fire, he says. That is the level of ardency. That is the level of urgency, Sangvega, we need to bring to the practice. I've had individuals in the past who, in the nicest, kindly, the most compassionate way as students towards a teacher, conveyed to me their discontent that I push too much I push the sense of urgency too much. Bhante, why don't you take it easy a little bit? We don't have time to take it easy. We can go any moment. But many of us are just collecting more and more rubbish, garbage, pointless things, when all we need is right here. Whether you're practicing the metta in your heart as your meditation object, whether it is your contemplation of death, that we're all going to die. Nobody's going to get out of here alive. I've said that, and you already know that. But we forget that. So you have those that we carry with us all the time. Here we see the breath. Webu Sayadaw, an arahant of the 20th century, an arahant with the most exquisite, simple, beautiful smile, would always encourage his listeners, inspire them with samvega, with sense of urgency, and he would always say, you already have enough tools. Lord Buddha has given you enough tools. Stop wasting time. And he says, you don't have to know many techniques. You only need one, he says. You only need one. Take it and go with it. Don't flip-flop, don't change, don't waste time. But know that one technique fully, clearly, deeply, perfectly. But you cannot know it unless you are with it. Can you really feel the texture of your heart when you're experiencing metta? Can you truly feel altruistic joy? Can you really feel the compassion, karuna, towards another person on a deep, deep level without losing your balance, though? Without having it affect you, to wobble your center. And you see how metta, or the Brahma Viharas, can and do take a person straight to Nibbana. But there is a caveat there. We need to apply the Satipatthāna and the 7 factors of awakening with them. Everything has to have these two if we're practicing Lord Buddha's teachings. So we need to practice steadfastly, as Webu Sayadaw would say. No matter what happens, just keep going at it. It's like a person who is creating fire using 2 pieces of dry sticks, wooden sticks. You rub and rub and rub, and you do not stop rubbing until you see smoke. But you do not stop the moment you see smoke either. You still continue a little bit more, and you make sure there's enough dry grass or cotton or something that can take fire, that can start quickly taking on the tiny little embers that you're creating with that friction. That friction is you applying your meditation object assiduously, carefully, every single day. And that is why I was trying to encourage you a few weeks ago and last week as well about the moment we wake up, can you put the signature of your mindfulness on the breath the moment you wake up? Even if your eyes are still shut, but you're awake. You came out of your dream state. Ah, I missed it. Oh, that becomes quicker, quicker, quicker every day. And then all of a sudden, even before you come out of your dream state, guess what? Sati is there with you, holding your hand. And then you will see the habitual tendencies, whatever they might be. They might be worries from yesterday, a bad conversation you've had, or something that you have to deal with today. Sati says, this is more interesting. The breath is more interesting. Or my metta is more interesting. Or I'm feeling the body move in the bed. Am I all over the place? Or the body is more in a state of togetherness, cohesive. It's not all over the place, like a toy. But you're more aware of your limbs, your head, the position of your fingers. That is where you're bringing the Dhamma into your life. And you don't have to know many techniques, no. So, but we should know them clearly and practice them continuously. So I will pause here and see if there might be some questions that I will try to answer. I think there are some messages that I see here from the chat. Okay. Yeah, there are no. Okay. Any questions that you might have pertaining to the practice or Dhamma related?
Bhante, as always, thank you for your talk. So I have a question about the word energy in the factors. The Buddha uses the term a surge of tireless energy. There's an article on access to insight by Piyadasi Thera, who, when he lists the Bojjhangas down there, he describes energy as virya, virya. So determination, patience, and perseverance, a couple of different ways of translating virya. But I've also heard teachers describe the Bojjhangas as just another way to describe the jhana levels. The experiences are the same. So my question comes down with the word of energy, and the Buddha said when he describes it as a burst of tireless energy, and that energy then leads to joy, which leads to tranquility, etc., through to equanimity. That seems to me to relate to the process through the jhanas, except that virya wouldn't fit for the energy. It would be in the jhanas, there'd be more, the word piti would be used, but piti can't be described as patience and perseverance. So can you give me your understanding of the word energy when it's used in the Bojjhangas, and whether the whole concept of the Bojjhangas being similar to the process of the jhanas is a reasonable comparison or not?
Good question. Again, it is not a fair comparison to make, I would say. The way I have seen and experienced and understand the Satta Bojjhangas to be compared as being similar or the same as the jhanas. Now, having said that, when you are going through the 7 factors of awakening, there are individuals who will experience the jhanas as you're going through the 7 factors of awakening. But not every person who goes through the jhanas necessarily will be able to experience the 7 factors of awakening. Now because there were contemporaries of Lord Buddha. I mean, Lord Buddha, before being the Buddha, he was Siddhartha Gautama. So he was practicing the jhanas. So he was able to go through all of the jhanas, all the way to the 8th. There were no Satta Bojjhangas there. Nowhere in the suttas have I come across any reference being made that Lord Buddha was, as Siddhartha or any of the other sects, the Ajivakas or Niganta, Nataputta followers, any of them were practitioners of the Satta Bojjhangas. Why do I say this? Because the 7 factors of awakening, when they are balanced, they facilitate the occurrence, if you will, of Nibbana. because there is a balancing going on, because it has wisdom. The jhanas, if you just carry them the way they are, just jhanas, there isn't a factor of wisdom there. There's ekagata, there is piti, there's vitakka vichara, for example, there's sukha. So, but you don't find panya. So Lord Buddha would always take us back to the fact that his path, his Dhamma, the Dhamma that he was teaching, and all Buddhas teach, must be based on wisdom, manifested in the form of the Four Noble Truths. And that is the teaching of the Buddhas all throughout eternity. The Buddhas, and that is how we are able to attain Nibbana. Without the Four Noble Truths, somewhere on the path where the person goes, now I see. You saw it in the 16 parts of the four tetrads. You saw it in the Satipatthānas. You saw it in the 7 factors of awakening. Now Lord Buddha is delineating all throughout the time. There is wisdom. Wisdom must be present. Now, the jhanas also can and are often part of the path. They're not a necessity, but they are. And Lord Buddha never stops talking so highly about the jhanas. But we always have to distinguish and find the confusing, aspects of what has happened during the past few hundred years, to the point where the commentators had held a very strong position, not just the commentators, but some parts of Southeast Asia, some of the countries, I don't want to mention them, but if you study them, you'll know. But you see some teachers, meditative traditions, had a very strong positions, or at least discouraged practitioners from going into the jhana territory. Why? Because they were afraid that the meditator would go out and away from the Dhamma and become mesmerized by these other things that happen because of the jhanas. You have the perfect example in the case of Devadatta, Lord Buddha's own cousin, who, by following the instructions of Lord Buddha on how to attain the jhanas, and to attain the jhanas per se, without wisdom, you don't have to necessarily follow Lord Buddha's teachings. You can also go to the Visuddhimagga and Buddhaghosa, who happened to be not a Buddhist all his life. He became a Buddhist later on. So he came from a Brahmanic tradition where they did practice the Kasina practice, and so they were aware of the jhanas, so the discs or the Kasina practices. So Devadatta took that practice and he delved deeper and deeper until he reached the 4th jhana. Now, if the Satipatthānas are not there, again, you can still taste the different fruits of the whatever the jhanas are going to offer you, minus the wisdom. This is the very clear boundary between Satta Bojjhangas and anything related with pure jhanas. So sometimes, a lot of people are talking, they read a book or two or go on a retreat or two, and they come up with their own conclusions based on I don't know what. However, it's necessary for us to go back to the suttas and really read, and I'm not talking about 1 or 2 suttas that are famous or whatever. Really read and pay close attention to what Lord Buddha is saying in these suttas. So the wisdom has to be there, period. And by the way, because he was in robes, Devadatta, but he was using the fruits of the jhanas, in this case, the psychic abhinyas, basically, and it was a very mediocre gross level psychic abilities. He lost them because he went against Lord Buddha, against the sasana, to break and create a schism in the sasana, and to even topple Lord Buddha to sit in his place. Not an iota of panya. But for all intents and purposes, if you were King Ajatasattu looking at Devadatta, who just showed up as a 10 or 12-year-old boy, standing there in front of you like a Medusa with his hair or cobras coming out of his body, you would be terrified. And also perhaps, well, you have the Dhamma, so he didn't. And he bowed to him. He's like, oh, what a great teacher you are, when he really revealed himself as a bhikkhu. But there were no element of panya at all. So that is how I would approach answering that question. But before I go to Lou, I'd like to ask Greg whether that you find to be satisfactory, Simone.
Yes, of course, I liked everything you said, but it did raise a couple of other questions. If it isn't the jhanas, then can you define better for me so I'm more clear? The sutta refers to when experiencing and while wisely investigating. What is experiencing and what is wisely investigating if it isn't meditation, or is it meditation but just not the jhanas? What is while investigating? What is that?
That is Dhamma Vichaya. That is Dhamma Vichaya, which is the 7 factor of awakening. Whenever we hear the word investigation, it's also, if you recall from a few months ago when we did the Iddhipada Vibhanga Sutta, where we talked about the 4 psychic powers or the 4 bases of success, the last of which is Vimamsa, which is, again, investigation, examination. So examination denotes, implies, refers to, highlights the process of discerning something. What am I going to? And that, if we don't have that investigation, we won't know that the seesaw is all over the place. Remember the 7 factors of awakening? We need to balance them. You need to have the investigation, the ability to discern, to know, wait a minute, do I have too much sloth within me? Is there hindrance of restlessness there? Which, if there is, then it means I have too much of this aspect, meaning the 7 factors of awakening, you can divide them into 2 branches. I think I've mentioned this or talked about this in some previous talks, but I'll go over it briefly here. The 7 factors of awakening, if you divide them, you will get roughly 2 groupings. One is the energizing group, and the other one is the calming group. The first energizing group, the first group, which is the energizing, has within it the effort or persevering energy. It has investigation of states, and it has piti. They're much more lively. They are doing process, have that quality about them. On the other side, which is the calming, you have passaddhi, which is tranquility, you have samadhi, and you have upekkha. Now, we're left with one, and that is sati. Sati sits in the middle. That's why we cannot not have sati. Sati is so important. It's so important that it is in so many formulas that Lord Buddha gave us. Without sati, you will not be able to know whether it's time for you to apply investigation, or whether you are applying. Now, if there is sloth, for example, or if there is tiredness, or if there's like, I don't feel like, or there's a sense of drowsiness, the last thing you would want to do is to tranquilize the mind, meaning to go into the calming group. Because the moment you do that, that is going to enhance that nivarana, that hindrance, to really find itself home, because you're going to fall asleep. But fortunately, we have the energizing group, and that's where these guys come in. But how will I know that the sloth and torpor is there? Dhamma Vichaya. But how will I apply Dhamma Vichaya unless I have sati? It won't work. So sati has to be always sharpened. So the moment you have the energizing, that indicates that you need to constantly fuel it until it creates a momentum. It's like that the passenger plane that goes up to cruising elevation and altitude, 33,000 feet up in the air, and it no longer has to push itself up through the clouds anymore, because now it can just glide. It just needs a little bit of push here and there every once in a while, the jet engines, and then it glides over. It's the same thing if we were to use that metaphor. So the energy has to be there to give you that energy flare so that you can create that momentum to come out of the inertia that the sloth was giving you. Now, when you have joy, remember, joy, piti, is also part of the energizing group. It's lively, it's colorful, it's moving. When it's too much, well, when there's joy, I'm not going to add any more or too much of the energizing group, whether it's effort or whether it's the Dhamma Vichaya, the investigation, because the investigation also creates friction. Because you're talking about a level of mind that you are being able to detect the tiniest, softest, subtlest nuances as the meditator is going deeper. So then if you have joy, even though it's such a wonderful thing, piti, I mean, how can you go wrong? But in order for us to go deeper, to reach a level of perfection, as Lord Buddha says in the sutta, we need to balance it, because it's too predominant. It's too hyperactive, if you will. So then we tap into the calming group. Now I have to coax the tranquility. I have to slowly soothe it into becoming more and more, the mind more and more collected. Because if there is piti in the mind, the mind is not in a state of equanimity. So it's moving. It's very slight, and it can be intense. Sometimes I've seen people who are so joyful, they start giggling uncontrollably, laughing uncontrollably. Well, guess what? It's completely seesawed now. You're just up there, you're so lost. There's no equanimity. So that is the time where we need to encourage the mind to use the other three. Any of the other three would do initially. So, but the beauty of it is to create this sense of harmony, and that harmony, when that harmony is taking place, so not one of the factors needs to become the most predominant. So there needs to be this balancing of the seesaw, and once it is balanced, the 7 factors of awakening are beautifully balanced, there is nibbana. Any of the stages. How does that work?
So something just occurred for me then that I didn't notice. I had always been thinking about the Bojjhangas as a sequence that we go through, and you've just described it as a seesaw. So I'm not going to start at the beginning and go through these things. It's all there at the same time in that balance you were talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, great. I'm glad we had this conversation, because I didn't understand that.
But it's great questions you raised. Was that helpful?
Oh, yes, that's made a big difference to how I'm going to be looking at this in future.
Oh, okay, wonderful, wonderful. Because I had the tendency of looking at, okay, first A, then B, then C.
Me too.
And it would drive me through the wall, not over the wall. I would just be going crazy over this. And okay, because that would bring up my old OCD out. Okay, this has to be perfect. And once it is perfect, then I will go into, no, because I didn't see any elements or evidence of that in the suttas. Because in life, that is not the case. I mean, your nails don't grow first. Or when the child is born, the skull is so soft because you had to come out of the mother's womb. Okay, the skull had to be soft. So when the skull is becoming more and more rigid, the bones are they're growing and they're getting more and more stiff, more rigid, but they're not the only ones that are growing, are they? The brain is growing, the blood vessels, the capillaries, the heart vessels, the eyes, everything is moving. So it's not, if I narrow my gaze on one, yes, I will just be focusing on that. But that doesn't negate the important fact that other things are going on at the same time. An entire biosphere of happening, if you will, that is taking place. And by us developing the discernment through sati is giving us the opportunity to look at the mind in a new light. It's an orchestra, it's a symphony, and you are, if you will, the maestro, the conductor who's standing there, and you're paying attention to whatever's happening. And every piece of instrument that is playing its part, important, key role in the greater symphony, to use another metaphor. So I hope that was good for you guys. And
last quick question though. This should be a short answer. My notes, when I see it, is refer to the Bojjhangas as Sambojjhanga for 7 of them. You've been referring to Satta Bojjhanga. I assume that's just a different way of saying the same thing, or is there a difference?
Yeah, sung or samma, it's like complete, it's a whole, but it's not 7. Satta is 7, the number 7. So I usually use, sometimes people say just it's like the completion of the Bojjhangas or the 7 factors. They don't say 7, they would say the whole factors of awakening. And that is another way of saying it without using the number 7. But when I'm referring it, I try to give you the Pali, fullest version of the Pali, so that becomes part of your lexicon. So, but they're the same.
Thank you.
Lou, yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I am really new. This is my second participation on the sessions. But I have been practicing since the 8th of December, specifically with the 2 videos where you give very interesting and very new to me indications for metta practice. Kalanyamita Dhammadina sent me one of the videos, and then in your channel I also discovered a second one that you offer to Italian friends. And that was also very helpful to me because Italian and Spanish, you know, we have a lot in common in many ways. So, you know, what I wish to express is that it was very difficult for me before to, let's say, practice metta, you know, in this kind of, yes, like as you express, cognitive way. So I did have resistance to that for a long time. And I was focusing in other tools of the teachings, you know, and finding benefits. Since I have been practicing on these 10 days, I have noticed benefits, but I just want to confirm that what I am doing is all right, is correct, you know, because it's so new to this constitution, body, mind, you know, I may be, who knows what I am doing. So I will briefly explain what I do and what is going on briefly with the practice. So, yes, usually when I sit, I just feel, you know, the body, the position, a bit of scanning, how are things going on, you know, like the mind is busy or not, or some breathing, you know, some sort of introduction, check up what's going on. Okay. And then I have been practicing complete sessions as you recommended, minimum 45 minutes or so with metta. So I go to the image. I have a beautiful image from childhood with my granny, abuelita, Abuela Aurelia. So for me, that immediately brings, these Vedanas, very beautiful. Oh, yes, like joy and tenderness and appreciation together. Then that gives me the opportunity to be in the body with the Vedana and observing the different types of comfortable, warm, tender Vedana. Then I already have my spiritual friend, a female spiritual friend, and yes, I know her. She's a true friend. So with the qualities that I really appreciate. So I am able to minimize her, like the image and the expression, and put her in my heart, as you said, as a seed, in miniature. And then I stay there with this beautiful expression for my friend and this Vedana, right? This loving Vedana. Then, of course, from time to time come some distractions. When I am able to discover that, that's when I use the 6 R's, which I have already learned by heart and easy to detect. Then, when I complete the 6 stages peacefully of the 6 R's, then again I return to metta with the same process, starting with Granny, the image, and then my friend. My question is that okay? Is that looking okay?
That and your smile on your face say a lot. And I have not heard anything that I would say you're doing something wrong. But I would just ask this: how does it feel compared to how it was before the 8 days or 10 days to now, as you're doing this? How is the
Yes.
mind feeling, the brain? How does it feel?
Yes, I have experienced changes. So, I mean, actually, there is like freshness and some lightness. And even when I have had a few interactions with others, because now we are again taking care because of COVID, the new variant, but I have been like helpful whenever I have been able, or to detect when I can give a hand, or receptive. I feel a bit more receptive. But yes, I notice, yes, some sort of, lightness or simplicity and appreciation of small things, something like that. I'm not too sure.
It's a beautiful bouquet of experiences, sentiments that you shared, and all of which, that simplicity that you mentioned. The Dhamma doesn't need to be complicated, but we try to complicate that. We complicate things with our views, our expectations. This is how my experience has to be. Now, the key thing, or the encouragement that I always try to remind myself and my students with or by, is this: can I maintain, or can I bring back at every sitting this same mindset of a beginner?
Yeah. Yes.
Can I have a simple approach? Lord Buddha, I don't think that many people would recognize Lord Buddha if we got into a time machine and went to India 2,600 years ago. We will try probably hard to find Lord Buddha when we are looking in the midst of his Arya Savakas, because he didn't look much different unless the person really probed and looked with their heart,
Mhm.
because there was a simplicity about them. There wasn't this haughty, this, I am a bhikkhu, I'm a chief disciple, I am the Buddha, I am this.
Mhm.
There's a softness to it.
Yeah.
There's a sharpness to it also.
Yeah.
There's an alertness that goes from moment to moment to moment. And never is there a moment where things are being taken for granted. So I encourage you, I am really happy that the practice is working for you. Of course, when it
Yes.
comes to individual personal experiences that I'd like to hear from practitioners, I'd rather you have that be done in a private. We can do that. Don't worry. This was fine because I found it, what you were sharing, to be very pertinent and even helpful and encouraging for your own friends here, Kalyana Mittas, who are practitioners. And so this is wonderful. And but if there are more questions or things come up, don't shy away from sending a note, and I will make time for you, and we will address those. But you seem like you're going well, so continue working,
Good.
continue being soft, applying
Yeah.
the teachings again and again, and most importantly, come back to the body when you get lost. Come
Yeah.
back to the body, come back, and just, again, from the heart, quickly. Okay? No agendas. No agendas. Okay?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Continue.
Okay.
Continue.
Excellent.
Very
So
good.
I continue, and if I need any further instructions, then I can send an email to you.
Yes.
That's the best way.
Yes, yes, yes. We can do that, and we can do a Zoom, you and I, and I'll say what needs to be said, depending
Yeah.
on what is happening.
Yes.
Okay?
So I apologize if I express anything that
No, no,
could affect any of the Kalanyamitas here.
no, no, no need
It
for
was just
apologies.
because it's so new. So, and as you said in one of the videos, take 10 days. And when I look and I said, oh, today is the 18th, maybe this is the right moment to check if
Very
these
good.
10 days I am, doing more or less something adequate or useful for me and for others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a term in the qualifiers of the Dhamma where it is, in Pali, it is pacchatang veditabbo vinuhi, which means it is to be realized by the wise for themselves, by themselves. This is where we can taste the Dhamma for ourselves. You don't have to rely on someone else's report, not even the Buddha. So if the Lord Buddha's teaching is not applicable in my life right now by me, tasted, to be tasted by
Yeah.
me, then really it's pointless. It's like any other religion out there. But the
Yes.
Dhamma is life transforming right here. That's why it is akaliko, which means it is timeless. So I commend you for your work, and no need for apologies at this point. But please do reach out, and as needed, we'll share some thoughts with you on your practice and move
Okay.
you right along. But just continue doing what you're doing. Sounds like it's going well, beautifully.
Okay. Thank
Very
you
good.
very much to
Mhm.
you, of course, and to everybody for this beautiful group. Yeah,
Wonderful.
I feel this is a good space. Thank you very much.
I'm glad, and we appreciate those sentiments, and I appreciate you all. Any other questions or thoughts that we might have? Still, we went over the 2-hour marker again. So if there are none, why don't we go ahead and share some merits? May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be upon you, with you, and your loved ones. And may you keep and retain the softness of your heart as you practice diligently, without holding back, and applying these principles that you're learning of the Dhamma, without taking anything for granted, especially your smile. And I'll see you next week. We will resume for next week. It will be the 2-hour sitting meditation followed by a Dhamma talk. And then the following week, we will have, again, the suttas. I think it will be the Punnovada Sutta from the Majjhima Nikāya. I think so. So take care, and I'll see you next week. Be well.